talking about how grants are scored. And we're very fortunate that we have a couple of people who are current reviewers, our grant reviewers, and also Dr. Brown here. So you guys feel free, all the reviewers, and Dr. Brown, feel free to chime in anytime and give inputs on this topic. I do not have any conflict of interest. So a little bit about myself. I've been a grant reviewer for a few years now. I think it's going to be my 5th year. And this talk, I got slides from Dr. Jeff Klein's talk a couple years ago when he was here, and then from Dr. O'Maro from her talk on the NIH peer review process, and also from Dr. Taylor, so I want to give him credit for this talk here. So who exactly identifies the reviewers? Who goes and asks different scientists and physicians to review different grants? So there are the scientific review officers. They are designated federal officials. They're extramural scientist administrators who recruits these reviewers, and they're the ones who manages conflict of interest. They arrange for review meetings, and they preside at these review committee meetings, and they are the ones who prepare and release summary statements. How are the reviewers chosen? They're chosen by their expertise and how established are they in their field. They try to select people with mature judgment and who are impartial, and they try to balance various representation in where they're from, their gender, seniority, and diversity, and also availability. And often these reviewers are holding the grant that you're applying to. So an R grant may have someone who are also holding an R01 grant. What are some considerations that they look at when picking reviewers? So you'll get 3 or more qualified reviewers, primary, secondary, and third reviewer. And it's based on scientific content application and also on the expertise of the reviewer. So Dr. Brown had mentioned earlier that the PI can make suggestions, but not names. You can say, I want someone who's an expert in pediatrics or in cardiology to review my grant. You may also get suggestions from the program staff, from the SRG members, and also they do it so all the workloads are balanced, and also to avoid any conflict of interest. What kind of conflict of interest do we see? So it can be financial. So for instance, if I am someone who is investing in a pharmaceutical company and a study involves that pharmaceutical company, then obviously I would have to exclude myself. Employment, anybody who's currently at UCSD, I cannot review any of their grants, or even if you're super close with someone from past hospitals, you may want to exclude yourself as well. So other includes personal, professional, SRG membership, and other interests. So this is something that's very important. They ask ahead of time, multiple times, and they'll ask you to step out of the room when a study is reviewed, where you have conflict of interest. So keep in mind, the SRG, or these reviewers and the committees, they only make recommendations, and they do not make funding decisions. They're the ones who give the impact priority scores and the criterion scores. They give considerations and give comments, recommendations. They give critiques, but again, at the end, it's not the SRG who makes the final decision on who to fund. So the grants are scored on a 9-point scale. So SAEM and NIH, they follow the same format. The overall impact score and the individual score or criteria is what they look at. 1 is an exceptionally score, and 9 is a poor score. 5 5 is an average score. So what happens is that they would multiply, so the final impact score, they'll multiply it by 10 to get the final impact or priority score. So you'll get a score from 10 to 90. If you got a 10, it means it's a near perfect score. That's what you want, okay? And then some grants might be ranked by percentile, and then you'll see more of different type of labels that they might have, but what you do not want is not discussed. If you get an ND, it means that your grant was not even reviewed by the committee. And this is why your specific aims page is so important, because a lot of times they'll ask, we're gonna streamline this grant. Does anyone have any objections? Now, if somebody read your specific aims page and they said, oh my goodness, this is brilliant, we gotta do this, someone might speak up for you. And this is why your specific aims page is that important, because it's sometimes the only document that they're looking at, all right? So here are the scale, 1 to 9. 1 is exceptional. It's exceptionally strong with essentially no weakness. So that's what we all should aim for. 2 is outstanding. So in each of the sections, you'll get 1 through 9 for each of them. So poor is very few strengths and numerous major weaknesses. So as a reviewer, I actually look at this a lot to help me see exactly where they are. So I usually start with a 5, and then I go up or down. I don't know how the other reviewers do it, but usually I follow this chart a lot. So other scoring guidance tables, you may get not recommended for further consideration. You may get DF or deferred, abstention, conflict, not present or not discussed. All right, so this is the grant evaluation form that the reviewers get. So in the significance section, you'll get strengths and weaknesses. So briefly, I'm gonna go over each section really quickly. So significance, they look at how relevant is your study? Is it gonna make huge changes to the field? What are some other, any reviewers wanna tell us what they look for in significance? What are some things that you really look for? And what are some of the weaknesses that you don't like to look, that are red flags for you? Anybody wanna, any of our mentors?
I'll just say my experience with significance is it's pretty easy to identify a problem, but I think many times there's a discrepancy between the proposed effort and the problem. So does it actually address the problem? Does it actually address the population you're talking about? Many times it's sort of like it's clear that this disease process is really significant, that's true. But is the thing you're doing really getting at the problem and that particular significance? Making sure those align is where I feel like it's very easy to find weakness. Because the problem is big and you're offering a part of the solution typically. Any one grant is not, you're not going to cure sepsis. I hate to tell all the sepsis people how to do sepsis. You're not curing sepsis in one grant. So you have to chip away at it, and you have to make sure that you're sort of chipping away at it, and those things are, that's where I see a lot of weaknesses. It's like, yeah, that's great, and yeah, that's cool, but there's two things on that.
Okay, anybody else wanna add? Go ahead, Dr. Muma.
I see that commonly, and I think the other piece of it as well is assuming that your readers understand the significance and that they're from your field. And that's not always the case as well, particularly when your grants go to the NIH and they may not be reviewed by somebody who has the same mentality as your grant. And the majority of your reviewers will not be able to take those positions in those cases. So you can't assume that they understand they should lose your grant.
So to bypass that, how can they bypass that? Be more detailed in their explanation in the problem?
Be very clear in those, don't make loops in logic. Be very clear how one thing leads into the next. I think in emergency medicine, we all understand it probably happens in every emergency department, but be very
All right, so investigator, strengths and weaknesses. So this is something that we look at, and that's why the biosketch is so important. A lot of times, someone may be doing a big data study, but we do not see an expert in the mentoring team. And so that's a huge issue. That's what we commonly look at. We'll ask them to ask or get new mentors. I think that's the place where the score might be lower. Let's see, what else? And then their experience, everybody's experience. So someone had asked a question, if you don't have a lot of experience, yes, absolutely. You need to make sure, especially you're a training scientist, you have to make sure that someone on your committee is holding an NIH grant or has in the past. I don't know if the reviewers agree with me on this, but definitely on the SAEM, we always look for someone who is holding an NIH grant, and it has to be someone who is an expert in that field, all right? We need to make sure that you are the team, even though you might be someone who is not very experienced, but your mentors and your team will get this job done, and you're the right team to give the money to, all right? It's almost like Shark Tank, too, if you think about it. All right, so innovation, we look at technology. We're seeing a lot of software programs, people wanting to put apps, which I think is a great idea. So we look at strengths and weaknesses on that, and then the approach, the study design, and then lastly, the environment. If they're in a hospital that's well-funded and has a lot of resources. So another one is the recommendation letter. We look at the recommendation letter a lot. Sometimes the department head doesn't seem very supportive of the PI. So it's so important that you review the letters yourself, all right? And make sure that they agree with whatever grant and whatever plan is in place. And it has to sound like supportive. They can't give you only certain hours to work on your research and expect you to work clinically. We don't like to see that, all right? Okay, anyone have anything else to add?
And just in terms of the environment, many of the people are going to be based at large medical centers either on the East Coast or the West Coast. But there is a program at NIH called the Idea States. We're currently sitting in an idea state. It's a state that is not typically as well-funded as California or New York or Massachusetts. And you can get additional support if you are coming from an idea state. You can actually get support from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences that funds that. Now, typically it goes to more basic research, but for those of you who are in Texas and Wyoming and Louisiana and all the other idea states which you can find online, just think about that, and you can use that to your advantage.
So do you recommend that we should move somewhere? Now, with the idea, hey, I have a question for you in that case. What about if those states don't have big university centers often?
Well, you've still got to prove that you can carry out what you say you're going to carry out. But as I said, just as there is an emphasis on PIs who are from underrepresented minorities, there is also NIH wants to be more equitable in where it's sending its money as well as to whom it's sending its money. And so that's just one fact. You need to look into the programs, but I have had idea state people, for instance, on the K Awards. That's something that you might be able to use to your advantage. So it's definitely worth thinking about.
Good to know. Thank you.
I'll just add real quick on the environment. The thing that comes up is, do you actually have the numbers of patients that you think you need? So it's one thing to do an analysis to get your power analysis and get your population and figure that out. It's another to actually have that number. And it's one thing to say, okay, well, we actually get that
there's one other thing that I can think of. I don't know how many of you are going to apply for a K grant or any type of training grant. In the proposal, you have to state exactly what kind of training you'll be getting, and if you're taking classes, if you're going to be getting programs, make sure you're organized as far as what classes you're taking. The more effort you put into explaining exactly what you're going to do at what time, exactly how many credits you're going to get, it shows that you're detail-oriented and you are organized and you are the candidate, okay? So grantmanship is so important when you are writing these grants. If you just say, oh, this is the big picture, this is what I'm going to do, but no detail plan, we don't like that. We don't like to see that. We're going to give it to someone who's organized and way more organized than you are, all right? Okay, so before the SRG meets, all the reviewers will review the grant on their own, and they will have a preliminary score. It's made available to all the other SRG members, and at the end, at the meeting, they will change their score based on the discussion, and then have a final overall impact score. So as you can see on the bottom here, reviewers are asked to revise their criterion score after the meeting, all right? So if you're, a lot of times the grant are triaged, so they're not even gonna review your grant, all right? So we only review the top grants. So the triage process, so the NIH, they review the A1 first. So the resubmissions are reviewed first, and the strongest, the lowest scores, or the best scores are discussed first. And then the A0s are reviewed later. Order is, last time I think Scott told us that it's no longer reviewed based on time received, right? I don't know if that's still true.
In the study sections I've been on, we have now randomized them.
Okay.
There was a thought that that was bias in application. So we are no longer going by score order. And we're not doing an A1, A0 either.
Oh, really? Okay.
The last two study sections I was on, and that was not being done. We did RO1s first and R21 second. That was the only.
And ESI first, which is good for review.
We did
ESI first?
everything was randomized in ours,
All right.
for what it was worth. That was thought to be the best way.
I think a lot of study sections do ESI first, which is good for, everybody know what ESI is, or stage investigator? Sorry, or stage investigator, so you're 10 years post your terminal degree, you can BSI if you are a PI on an R21 or an R01, and those grants get reviewed first when everybody's fresh and happy and feeling good about themselves, and when they are tired and no longer reviewing the applications.
Okay, and then, as I said, reviewers are given their score first. Some of the applications are triaged and not discussed at all. So it's important that all 3 of your reviewers, like your study, work on curb appeal. And then the scores are distributed, and then the SRG decides which application they want to discuss. All right, so if 60 applications are turned in, 50% are streamlined. So they typically may discuss 30 applications. So if 9 hours at the SRG meeting, half hour of introducing each study and streamlining, 1 hour for lunch, 2 15-minute break, at least 14 minutes per application, and 3 to 4 minutes per reviewer. And so why did I want to share this slide? Is your specific aims page is so important, all right? And also I shared that you have to make sure your applications really touch their heart and soul, and you know what I mean? Really convince them that you're passionate about what you're doing, all right? So have as many people read your applications as possible. All right.
And if I just say, in my experience, again, doing this through NINDS, it's not quite as grim as that. It's actually closer to, and probably there are fewer than 60 applications getting reviewed each cycle. That's probably where it all begins with. But they will typically spend up to 50 minutes or even an hour talking about one specific So and that's good. That's a good thing. They're not quite as pressured as you guys in the ED.
But not all studies. Some studies, they do spend 60
This
hours.
is just my experience, and everybody has their own experience and their own study section and how they do it.
We're probably, at least last time, the SRO is trying to get us down to 15 minutes per application. We rarely hit that mark. It's closer to 20, I would say. But if we went 30 minutes on an application, that would be wrong.
My experience was the same, about 15 minutes an application, and they also ranked ESIs in with the full independent investigators, and then they did it in the order of the scores too, so like by the time you were tired, you were trying to weed out between people that had like similar scores, and it was really brutal. So.
Yeah, well, I think the important takeaway here is that different study sections do it in very different ways. That is clear, right, from just what you've heard today. So,
All right, so before discussion begins, panel members will have 1 minute to read the aims of the application, and then the primary reviewer will present. We'll have a mock session, and you can see exactly what goes on. All right, and then that's pretty much what I want to cover on this slide. And then everybody will then discuss, and then people will then vote. And then other consideration we'll discuss, such as budget and other issues. So overall impact score. This overall impact score reflects the likelihood for the project to exert a certain sustained, powerful influence on the research field involved. So it involves the 5 core review criteria I had discussed earlier, plus additional criteria reviewed. This is not a 6th review criterion. And just so you guys know, they don't go and average. We don't average investigator score, significance, and approach. No, this is all together its own score, all right? So based on how much we like your study. And so as I said, it's evaluated and scored independently of other criteria. Additional review criteria includes vertebrate animals, biohazards, if it's submission, renewal, revisions, things like that, and the budget. So that's not added in the core 5 criteria, but additional review criteria I talked about afterwards. They're a factor into the overall impact score. So after the review, the NIH program officers will be the point of contact, and they'll wait for the summary statement, and then they'll read the statement before calling the applicant sometimes, and then a favorable score does not guarantee funding. So as Jeremy had said earlier, Dr. Brown had said earlier, if you are not funded the first attempt, what should you do next? Revise and resubmit. All right, so that's pretty much all I have prepared. Anybody have any questions?